Afghan partners who help U.S. troops waiting for special immigration visas to U.S. Chauvin sentenced to 22.5 years in jail, George Floyd's death. Mounting U.S. state abortion restriction propel action from supporters' critics. Good evening, viewers. Welcome back to TV Education Timor in the Voice of America News. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dorsely Lifania. I will bring you the latest news, sharp and reliable from all around the globe. VOA and TV Education Timor cooperate to deliver Voice of America News through the TV Education Timor channel. Well, let's begin the news for today. The White House reportedly began preparation this week to move the thousands of Afghans who aided U.S. troops to enter a third country while they wait to apply for special immigration visas.
As the U.S. hits the 50% mark of troop withdrawal from Afghanistan,
Mr. President, any concern about reports that
Afghan President Ashraf Ghani is in Washington meeting with U.S. lawmakers Thursday, ahead of his Friday White House meeting with President Joe Biden to discuss the U.S.-Afghan relationship moving forward.
He'll probably make a request for more assistance, and we'll have to hear what his ask is of the United States, but the Commander-in-Chief has made the decision to pull our defense forces out. I assume we'll be talking about force protection at the embassy.
McCall and other lawmakers are also calling on the Biden administration to protect the 18,000 Afghans who helped U.S. forces and are now waiting for visas to the United States.
There are thousands of people left that were told they would get an opportunity to come to the United States if they would put their lives and their families' lives on the line, not just their own. This is the right thing to do.
Processing of special immigrant visas takes an average of 800 days. As Taliban violence around Afghanistan in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal grows, Afghans are saying they will be targeted.
We have sacrificed for the U.S. forces in this really important mission for 22 years in Afghanistan. We are requesting to the President Joe Biden, this is the right time that take care of us and our families, because we have been faced with a really big risk in Afghanistan.
Those interpreters could be evacuated and accepted for temporary residency by the U.S. territory of Guam, Afghan war veteran Representative Jason Crow told VOA.
The Department of Defense and the U.S. military is ready. The State Department is ready. Guam is ready. We need the decision by the White House to say, let's do this.
But with less than 100 days until the U.S. withdrawal is complete, many lawmakers say it's not clear there is a single person in charge of the process.
I certainly have not heard of any operational commander for making this happen. And at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need an operational plan and an operational person in charge to actually execute this evacuation.
The U.S. has set a September 11th withdrawal deadline from Afghanistan after nearly 2 decades of being engaged in conflict there. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
Derek Chauvin will face 22.5 years in prison for the murder of George Floyd, the case that triggered international protester and calls for greater racial reckoning.
As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd.
As Derek Chauvin listened, Judge Peter Cahill said that he did not make his decision based on public opinion and that he recognized the pain the case had caused everyone inside the courtroom and elsewhere. Earlier in the hearing, Chauvin addressed the Floyd family briefly, stopping short of issuing an apology.
At this time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement at this time. But very briefly, though, I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family.
But members of Floyd's family told the court that words cannot take away their pain.
I wanted to know from the man himself, why? What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Why when you knew that he posed no threat anymore, he was handcuffed, why you didn't at least get up? Why you stayed there?
Floyd's nephew later said the judge's sentence is not true justice for his uncle.
When you think about George being murdered in cold blood with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, execution style in broad daylight, 22 and a half years is not enough. Right. Go ahead. We were served a life sentence. We can't get George back. Gianna can't hug George again.
I can't breathe all the time.
This cell phone video of Chauvin placing his knee on Floyd's neck outside a store in Minneapolis in May 2020, along with several other high-profile killings of black citizens in recent years, sparked worldwide protests, particularly in the U.S. Chauvin still faces federal civil charges in Floyd's death. He is expected to appeal both his criminal conviction and his sentence. Robert Raffel, VOA News.
Myanmar military authorities incinerates what they said were $680 million worth of siege narcotics and precursor chemicals on Saturday. Hollywood actress and special envoy for UN Refugee Agency, Angelina Jolie, is praising Burkina Faso's effort in helping people displaced by Islamist militants.
Deep in Burkina Faso's war-torn Sahel province lies the Gadubo refugee camp. It was rebuilt after Islamist militants burnt much of it to the ground last year. Around 11,000 refugees live here. They fled Mali, a country plagued by armed groups linked to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, to another beset by the same problem. Hollywood actress Angelina Jolie, who is special envoy for the UN's refugee agency, UNHCR, recently visited Gadubo to mark World Refugee Day and praised Burkina Faso for its treatment of the displaced.
The truth is, we are not doing half of what we could and should to find solutions to enable refugees to return home or to support host countries like Burkina Faso, coping for years with a fraction of the humanitarian aid needed to provide basic support and protection.
Her visit took place in the country's only major refugee camp. Official sites for the country's 1.2 million internally displaced people, IDPs, are off limits to the media due to a government ban. Burkina Faso is one of the world's most neglected humanitarian crises, according to the Norwegian Refugee Council, and is struggling both to ward off terrorist attacks and protect IDPs. But its security forces have been accused by a local human rights group, the Collective Against Impunity and Stigmatization of Communities, of atrocities against IDPs. A victim of one attack described watching his friends being killed in front of him by security forces.
When they had finished gathering the young people, they burned everything, houses as well as crops. Then they took 2 people and shot them dead. One of us was beaten to death right next to me, as close as you are to me now.
Human Rights Watch says abductions and extrajudicial killings of civilians are common in Burkina Faso.
Since 2019, Human Rights Watch has documented over 200 cases of extrajudicial killings by Burkinabe armed forces in the context of counterterrorism operations. This is an extremely worrying trend, which feeds, of course, in recruitment efforts by armed Islamist groups.
IDPs live in constant fear, says the UNHCR.
In the conflict-affected areas of the Sahel, communities literally live with the fear of the next attack, and that's what's driving up the number of people forcibly displaced. And with that, of course, comes higher needs for basic humanitarian services.
Burkina Faso's defence ministry did not respond to requests for comment on the accusation of extrajudicial killings and abductions. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Kudubo refugee camp, Burkina Faso.
United States Vice President Kamala Harris traveled to El Paso, Texas on her official visit to the U.S. southern border on Friday. Her focus following up on her Guatemala and Mexico trips and seeing firsthand the detention centers.
Vice President Kamala Harris arrived in El Paso, Texas on Friday for her long-awaited visit to the southern border with Mexico. As part of the Biden administration's plan to stem the flow of immigration, Harris traveled with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
So the work that we have to do is the work of addressing the cause, the root causes. Otherwise, we will continue to see the effect, what is happening at the border. It is going to require, as we have been doing, a comprehensive approach that acknowledges each piece of this, informed also by the recognition that the United States is a neighbor in the Western Hemisphere, and not only do we have a reason to concern ourselves with the root cause issues because of what we see at the border, but also because we live in that neighborhood.
Across the border from El Paso is Ciudad Juárez. Here, the Honduran migrant Manuel Orlando Pinto Medina hopes to convey his message to Harris and Mayorkas.
I would like them to know that many of us leave our countries out of fear, necessity, poverty, lack of security. It's not easy to abandon your home.
El Paso Republican Party Representative Bobby Peña views the visit as a political move.
The reason why the vice president is coming is simply because President Trump said he was coming.
Peña is referring to an announcement from former U.S. President Donald Trump, who has plans to travel to the border on June 30th. Peña also highlighted Harris' controversial statements during her recent trip to Guatemala and Mexico.
If Trump had never come, she might have never come. She always says, yes, I'll go. She's not interested, just like she's not gone to Europe. She's not interested.
Vice President Harris has reiterated that her priority is to focus on seeking solutions for the root causes of migration. For Fernando Garcia, director of the Border Network for Human Rights in El Paso, this visit comes at the right time.
It was about time that she came to listen to our communities. We have thousands of children in a military base called Fort Bliss. Those children do not have to be incarcerated. They must be with their families. Hopefully, she will solve that.
Harris visited the Border Patrol processing centers on Friday, where migrants, including unaccompanied children, are held after entering the United States. Celia Mendoza, VOA News, El Paso, Texas.
Multiple protesters were held Saturday in London as demonstrators filled the streets over coronavirus restriction, austerity measures, and climate change. Pandemic, economic pressure, and more state limits on aborting are driving an increasing number of women, especially the poor, to Washington, D.C. to terminate their pregnancy.
Since January alone, at least 83 abortion restrictions have been enacted across 16 U.S. states, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a reproductive rights group. Most affected, women of color, especially those left jobless during the pandemic. One result, abortion demand is sharply up in states like Colorado and in Washington, D.C., where access is easier. In the nation's capital, the DuPont Clinic has seen a 10% increase in patients from other states since March 2020. Half don't have insurance and can't pay the cost of up to $12,000 for the procedure. So, nonprofits fill the gap, as the clinic's co-founder Maritza Arias-Bazemore explains.
We collectively, through all the funds, provide the help that they need. It's not limited to just the financial, but it's also including the transportation, the logistical support, transportation, hotel, etc.
The all-volunteer DC Abortion Fund is among the nonprofits raising money to assist. Requests are up, primarily from women who've lost low-wage jobs.
For the first 5 months of 2021, we have pledged over $100,000 each month. That's more than twice what we usually pledge. So we're doing our best, but it's completely unsustainable.
We want to stop abortion. We want to protect those babies.
Pro-life groups want abortions banned and are mobilizing to oppose the Biden administration's proposal to Congress to eliminate the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits using taxpayer money for abortions.
The Biden administration is the most rabid, radical, extreme pro-abortion administration that we have ever had. So we want everyone to be talking to their members of Congress to put pressure on them.
Also in Congress, anti-abortion forces are fighting the Women's Health Protection Act, legislation that could roll back abortion limits in the states.
Would strike down health and safety protections, would strike down informed consent provisions, would strike down late-term abortion protections, and we're talking about nearly every state in the nation has these types of laws.
Yet, in states where new abortion limits are in place, abortion rights activists worry most about the so-called Texas heartbeat law. It bans abortion after around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Unrelated parties would get the right to sue abortion providers. Brittany House had an abortion in 2012. A volunteer for the pro-choice group Planned Parenthood, she says the stigma for terminating pregnancies, especially for poor Black women, needs to be overcome.
You don't want women to have abortions, that's fine. However, what social equity programs are out there in the states that are having these bans that will help women not have abortions, right? Are you increasing SNAP benefits? Are you increasing child care benefits? Are you increasing transportation? Like, what are you doing to ensure that women don't have abortions?
Under the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Roe v. Wade, abortion is legal. But how far states can go to restrict it is an ongoing political and legal battle.
We need to be open to understand the arguments that each side offers and hopefully get to some kind of middle ground that will ultimately support the health of women and their families.
In May, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a challenge to Mississippi's ban on abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Now, with a solid conservative majority, the court could upend 48 years of law. Verónica Valderas Iglesias for VOA News, Washington.
The Biden administration $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure agreement on spending to rebuild roads, bridges, and other projects faced a critical week. The cloud determined the scope of U.S. infrastructure investment.
Now comes the hard part. The fragile agreement between President Joe Biden's administration and a bipartisan group of senators on U.S. infrastructure spending must win even broader support from lawmakers in both parties. What remains uncertain is whether the limited bipartisan plan is what will get done, or if a more ambitious and likely more polarizing Democratic-backed bill can pass Congress. The bipartisan plan calls for $1.2 trillion to be spent over 8 years on roads, bridges, railways, public transportation, and airports, as well as improvements to the power grid and the expansion of broadband internet access. To help pay for these projects, the plan reportedly relies on unused pandemic aid and other means. On Saturday, Biden walked back a statement he had made that appeared to link his support for the agreement to the passage of another spending bill on so-called human infrastructure, such as elder care, education, and child care. That $6 trillion package would include tax increases on the wealthy. Some Democratic leaders have said they are not happy with the slimmed-down bipartisan package.
I can't vote for some small subset that, the infrastructure train leaves the station and child care gets left on the platform. Green energy gets left on the platform. Billionaires don't have to pay gets left on the platform. It's that all of the pieces have to move because ultimately it's one deal.
To surpass a filibuster in the evenly divided Senate, the bill will need 60 votes. Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat who was part of the bipartisan group, says there's time for working on a bigger infrastructure bill.
We have two tracks, and that's exactly what I believe is going to happen. And we've worked on the one track. We're going to work on the second track. There's an awful lot of need.
Senator Rob Portman, a Republican who also worked on the deal, says the smaller infrastructure package is a chance to get something done.
People are looking for us to get something done, specifically on infrastructure, but more generally to work together to solve big problems.
The White House and Democratic leaders are hoping both packages will be passed in July. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
Well, TV Education Timor viewers, this is all the news for today's section. For more information, please call us on the number below. I'm Lifania on behalf of the crew on Dati. Step back from your face, have a good night, and see you next time. TV Education Timor is the future inspiration.